So I'm Scott with boberdoo. My brother Brett, who also works with boberdoo, is going to be chiming in on this call. Brett, I'll ask you to unmute.
Yep. Hey, how's everyone?
And so I'll go ahead and share my screen. We'll jump right into it. We are recording this call, so we'll be publishing this at the end. But we'll just start out with an outline here on what we want to cover today. Just a overview of the ping post process. We'll talk a little bit about the details there of pinging simultaneously and posting sequentially. We'll talk a little bit about margins, best revenue scenario, which most of our clients, but not all of our clients, are on. Then we'll get into some of the tools that you can do to utilize or to optimize your margin. So fake ping price, fake post price, when the right scenario is to use those. Dig into the ping post logs a little bit, and then we'll talk about some optional add-ons that boberdoo has related to optimization of your margin or your lead buying, depending on if you are a lead buyer or a lead seller. So as we go through this, when we talk about ping post, that is the process of a lead seller sending partial information to a lead buyer, giving them the opportunity to dynamically bid on that lead or to not bid on that lead at all. We still have a couple people coming in here, so bear with me. So when we look at that process, again, if you are somebody that is receiving a ping, is different than if you are a lead generator and you are pinging out to potential buyers to maximize your revenue. And that is also different than if you are a lead generation company that is arbitraging pings from other lead sellers as well as generating your own. All of those are part of the ping post process, but they mean different things to different companies. So the first thing we want to get into here is the more of the details of how the ping and the process, the post process works. So when we say pinging sequentially, or excuse me, pinging simultaneously and posting sequentially, that is from the perspective of a boberdoo client sending out pings to their buyers. So a lead comes in, that could be a full posted lead or a ping from a vendor. Your system will go through the exclusionary logic that you'll hear if you've ever talked to me. You've seen this infographic and gone through the process. Essentially, we will work on an exclusionary basis, meaning that we will exclude all of your partner accounts that are not active, that do not have available funds, and do not have a matching filter set. And then we will ping all of the matching partners that are left. So we are pinging the filter sets of fixed price lead buyers. You have a basic filter set, the lead price in there is $10. That system is actually pinging that. And at the same time, we are pinging any dynamic buyers that are set up in your system to capture their response. Now,
sorry to interject real quick.
Please.
This is where you may have seen in your lead filter sets, in your lead logs, the term fake ping. And so that is referring to any buyer that just does not have a ping post delivery. The buyers that do have ping post deliveries are the ones that have the custom delivery configured, right? And that ping is actually sent to their server to get the dynamic price. Whereas the fake ping is, we like to refer to as boberdoo's placeholder, right? That's that point we're doing a fake ping, really just grabbing the lead price from the filter set. So that way, at that same step in the flow, we're either getting the price from the filter set or we're getting the price from the dynamic delivery. And so that's after these matches are done to get the then prices to then determine then who should then get the lead. And that kind of leads into the next part, Scott, for the the tiebreaker. And so by default,
Sorry. I had muted myself, so I didn't
No
bring
worries.
all of your answers. So when we are talking about pinging simultaneously, that brings us to timeouts. And so timeouts are set at the source level, and you have a ping timeout and a post timeout. This is how long this particular vendor gives you to process that ping and corresponding post. The default is 30 and 60, but we do see some vendors go all the way down to 3 or 4 seconds if you're talking ping post for calls. And so the idea is, because you ping simultaneously, the system, if you think of that ping going out as the fingers of your hand, as that dynamic buyer returns a bid, that is essentially those fingers curling back into a fist on your hand. So once we hit that ping delivery timeout, we calculate your best revenue scenario based off of what has been returned at that point. So if you have a dynamic buyer that has not yet bid on the lead, we drop that and do not consider it in creating your best revenue scenario. Now, if this is a direct posted lead that you generated off of your website, the system would then automatically continue to the post. But if you are bidding on leads from a vendor at this timeout point, if you have not, at the most this timeout point, but if all of your buyers respond earlier, obviously they were going to get that bid back sooner. At this point, we're going to build your best revenue scenario, carve out your margin, and return the bid back to the vendor as your represented bid. And so that is all done. So the reason that simultaneous pinging is important is because it allows you to create your best revenue scenario and get that back to your vendor no matter what their timeout is. So that's going to bring us to posting sequentially. So that means that when we have our best revenue scenario, we do not attempt to post to all of the partners at the same time. So this is getting into the exclusive versus non-exclusive that I'm also going to cover here in a second. But in this case, we're going to assume this is a non-exclusive delivery. So in a non-exclusive delivery, we are going to post sequentially, meaning that we will post to the first buyer. In this case, it is Grace. And upon her success response, we will then deliver that non-exclusive lead to the next best partner. The next partner in that best revenue scenario, in this case, it is Emily. Upon her success, we then will sell that third leg to Brett. Now, if at any point you are receiving a post reject, if this happens on the first attempt, we recalculate that best revenue scenario. And then as long as the next best revenue scenario is equal to or greater than the bid that you returned back to the vendor, the system will continue on with processing. The idea is at that point, your best revenue scenario that you built the lead, that you built your bid off of, is no longer working. So you're going to try to make whatever money that you can, as long as you can sell it profitably. If your next best revenue scenario is less than the bid that you return back to the vendor, you will in turn post reject that lead back to the vendor. So as we are continuing with that sequential delivery, we kind of reach the point of no return, which is after that first partner submits the success response. So again, we are talking about a non-exclusive delivery situation here where you attempt to Grace and she responds with success. You are pot committed to this lead, as they say. So if Emily post rejects that lead, the system will continue to just try and sell that lead for whatever it can, because at this point, it is no longer about even trying to maintain any margin or trying to try to post reject the lead. It is just about getting whatever money you can for that lead, since your revenue scenario is no longer applicable. So the good news is that at every step along the way, the lead system does recalculate your best revenue scenarios, whether that is an exclusive or a non-exclusive delivery. So if we take that same example, we'll cover that in an exclusive delivery here in a second, but the same process holds. We do have some pretty good content pieces on pinging and posting sequentially that we'll get to you along with the recording of this call after. So that is going to bring us to the margins. So depending on when you've became a boberdoo client, the margin residing in different places in the lead system has come in and out of fashion as different functionalities or different needs have been developed in the marketplace. So as of today, most of our clients have the margins residing on the filter side, with the option of doing vendor premium margin. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time, but that is not applicable for everybody. Some people do have essentially a minimum margin at the source level, and so the entire margin then is based off of the source, regardless of the matching partners in the system. So again, we can always switch and transition you off of source to filter and vendor premium margin if your system is based on source. Now, in my opinion, it does give you more flexibility. Of course, with more flexibility and more options does come some more complexity to that, and we're going to be covering that in a little bit more detail here. So when we look at the filter sets, and we're going to just start with the basic one as a recap. And then we will, we're going to enable some more sophisticated options in this system here while we're going through this initial setup, so that we can take a look at what that filter sets look like with those options in there. So when we look at the profit margin, big question is, what is the type of partner or lead buyer that you have? If this is a direct post or a fixed price lead buyer paying $10 per lead, then really you have really kind of two options. One is the fixed, which is what most people do. Hey, every time a lead comes in and matches to this partner and this filter set, I want to take a $2 margin out. So lead comes in, matches to this ping at $10, or this filter at $10. We take out $2 and return $8 back to the vendor as your represented bid. The other option that we have some people that use is the scheduled margin. So this would allow you to create some rules based around time and day of the week to take out different margins. This would be if you have 24/7 buyer and maybe are facing different amounts of competition based on the time of day or day of week. You will also see in here AI adjuster. This is our AI, our demand-based AI model that I'll touch on later at the end of this call. But for a base use case here, we're just talking about essentially carving out a fixed price margin. None of the other things in that filter set really are applicable here, because every time the lead matches this filter set, $10 is going to be used. Now, if we have a dynamic buyer, this would be somebody that you are pinging out to get their dynamic bid. This may be another lead generation company. This may be a large lead buyer. or agency that is looking to have more control over their demand. In this case, the variable option is the most popular, and the reason is it allows you to build a matrix that allows you to take different margins based off of the bid that's returned from that dynamic buyer. So just as a base use case, you might say something like, if this bid is between $0 and $10, I want to take a 10% margin. If this bid is between $10 and $20, I want to take a 20% margin. And if that bid is above $20, I want to take a 30% margin. This does allow you then to capitalize more on the better bids or the higher bids that are returned back from your vendor, if you so choose. The other thing, as far as a dynamic buyer is concerned, is the minimum price for a delivery. This is especially important if you're generating your own leads and you want to establish a floor for the value of your leads. In this case, I do not want to sell a lead to this partner for less than $3, even if they are the best revenue scenario. And so that allows you to control and again maintain that floor for your partners. So I'm gonna refresh this. I think I might get lucky. Brett have some additional options put into play for us. So in here, we have this fake ping price and fake post price. We're going to be covering these in more detail about how you can do that to further manipulate both the margin, or excuse me, the bid returned back to the vendor, and then also the post order, so that you can attempt the post to those partners that you want to make sure you're going to get the success response before you become POC committed. Before we get to that point, I want to jump into the source side again to talk about the second part of the margin calculation, which is the vendor premium margin. So with the vendor premium margin that we see right here, it is tied to returning the best price. So from a technical standpoint, if you do not have return best price configured at the source level, then it doesn't matter what your vendor sends, you are not going to return a bid. Conversely, if you do have this enabled, but the vendor does not send return best price equals 1, you will not return a bid. And it has to be a clean handshake for that parameter and the setup in your system. And that's for your protection, so that you're not returning a bid to sources that you don't want. The good news is the source wizard will automatically configure all of those settings for you. If you go through the source wizard, we do have the 2 options for ping post, the dynamic bid being the most common. So going back to our return best price, we have yes and yes, but sold non-exclusively. If you are selling non-exclusive leads, then this is a must. But also, if you are in best revenue scenario, this is the prevalent system switch, because it does allow your system to recalculate the next best revenue on a post reject. If we only have yes set here, then in the if the best revenue scenario or best price is post rejected in your system, the system just stops and post rejects it back to the vendor. Next, we have the maximum best price. We talked about a floor. This is your ceiling. In this case, I don't care what the bid says I should return. I don't ever want to return more than a $10 bid to this source. And then finally, we have the vendor premium margin. So I would say this is more of the advanced use case. I would use this with caution, and I would set all of my margin primarily in the filter set. It gives you the most flexibility, and it gives you the ability to adjust through multiple filter sets for your partners. But in some cases, right, you just want to, maybe you don't want to have to set up a whole nother set of filter sets for a specific use case. And if the lead is coming from this particular source, you simply want to give the vendor an additional, in this case, a fixed amount of, say, $1, or a percentage base. I want to give them 10% more. And so this, in a positive format, will increase your bid returned back to the vendor. And conversely, a negative will decrease your bid back to the vendor. So if we look at this case here, if excuse me, if the best revenue scenario in your system is, say, $10, you have a 20% margin, which means you would return $8 back to the vendor. This instead would take an additional 10% from that margin calculations for yourself, so that you return less to the vendor. Again, conversely, many clients just say, this is a quality source, so I want to give them $1 more for any lead that comes through this source. So that is something that you can use to your advantage when it's applicable. Again, that is set at the individual source settings. All right. So next up, we're going to go back to those filter sets and talk about fake ping and fake post price. So when we look at fake ping price and fake post price, they're used for typically different use cases, and they're also used at different points in this ping post process. The fake ping price is used to manipulate your bid back to the vendor. So that is all this is used for. So in this case, fake ping is often used to offset refunds. So for example, if this partner is paying $70 per lead and they are returning 20% of their leads, you may only want to consider, when this filter set matches, a $54 bid, just because they will return 20% of their leads for refund at the end of the month, but you don't know which 20%. So this essentially would allow you to account for that refund percentage. And when that lead comes in, we are building this margin, in this case, let's call it $10, off of a fake ping price of $54 as opposed to $70. So the ping comes in, it matches this filter set at 54, we carve out $10, we then are returning $44 as a bid back to the vendor. This can be used in an absolute value, or in the case of a dynamic buyer, be used as a percent. So for example, I only want to take 80% of whatever the dynamic bid is and use that, only consider it at $80 less $10 and return $70 to the vendor as your represented bid. So I often get people, does this work in the inverse? It's like 110. I would caution you against using the inverse here, because in this case, you could essentially be eliminating your margin. So if this bid in this case is $10, you're going to consider that at $11 as the actual bid. But if you go to sell that lead, you are still going to be selling that lead at $10. Or in the case of what we were looking at before, you would still be selling that lead at the lead price of $70. So the big takeaway here, fake ping price allows you to manipulate the bid returned back to the vendor. So you do all that work and then you win the post. Great, the post comes in. Again, we are going to be posting that to your best revenue scenario. And now the post is the best revenue scenario is something that is always being recalculated, and each change in scenario response. And so what that means is there may be situations where you want to manipulate the order of posting sequentially. And so by that, I mean, Ping comes in, you are building a bid non-exclusively off of these three partners. You return that bid back to the vendor. The vendor says you win the lead, here's the post. Now, we have to consider post rejects here. Because, again, becoming pot committed after a success. So if you had somebody, let's say Emily, that post rejects 50% of her leads, and Grace that post rejects very little, 0, 1%, something like that, and they are both used in your best revenue scenario, you want to know if Emily is going to post reject that lead before you attempt it to Grace, because you want to know if you have to recalculate that best revenue scenario, is that going to be still higher than the bid you return back to the vendor? Because if it's not, you just want to post reject that lead right then and there. You want to avoid that being pot committed. So that's where the fake post price comes in. Again, this can be used as an absolute value or as a percentage. Absolute value use case is pretty obvious here. Basically, let's just say, when a post comes in, regardless of the bid that was returned, I want to consider $75 in the post attempt for that fixed price partner. And the reason that this is not a rank order is because of dynamic buyers. So dynamic buyers, you may want to manipulate there on a percentage, because let's just say I want to consider 120% of their bid when I'm attempting the post order, because I want to make sure that they're first. So if there was 3 buyers each at $20, this would essentially consider that bid to be $24, and so it would be attempted before any of the other two $20 bids. And so the reason it's expressed as a percentage is because there may be cases where you don't want to attempt to them first, because you do have another buyer that is willing to pay so much more. So if it's a $20 bid, you're considering this at $24. If you have another revenue scenario that's at $70, you would not want to attempt that $24 bid first. So again, this helps you manipulate the ordering of the post, which is done sequentially. So again, for this one, my recommendation is, really use this on clients that have high post reject rates and are buying non-exclusive leads. That's really the biggest use case here. Allows you then to attempt those first and recalculate your next best revenue scenario if and when they post reject the lead. So we do have an example in the lead logs that we'll cover in the system as well, but just kind of bring it up. We've whited out all of the non-things that are related to this scenario and scenario recalculation. So what we see here, and we're going to read this top down, our lead logs are bottom up, and we're going to take a look at those, but this is just to illustrate that recalculation of the scenario. So the ping comes into this system, and the system builds the best revenue scenario of buyer XYZ at $25. And so these are the ping responses. We see both a bid for $25 from one buyer and then $15 from the other. When that post comes in, that $25 buyer post rejects that lead for lead validation purposes. So the system then recalculates it and sells it to the next available buyer, which is ABC, at $15. So that is the exact bid that is returned back to the vendor based off of that first best revenue scenario. And so because those are equal or greater, it then processes on to the next best revenue scenario. They get the matched response. Your system then in turn responds back to the vendor with your success response. So if we look into a lead system, we can see those things happening here. Lead coming in this case, matching to different partners with different margins. And then again, reading from the bottom up, you see the ping. In this case, the post is then sent in the same second. And the confirmation of the partner, which means that your system in turn responded back to your vendor at 10/20/14 with that success response. All right. So that is going to bring us to some optimization options that we have. Some of them are available in the system currently. Others are in development or in beta right now. So I just wanted to introduce some of those options. They're really designed to help you optimize either your margin or your lead buying, depending on your use case. I'll be jumping into another lead system here, our demo system. So the next thing that we will talk about is our bid experiments. Bid experiments allow you to A/B test different margins or lead price. It is a live A/B test, meaning that the system partitions off some of the pings coming from the vendor and actually does the variant calculation and returns that bid back to the vendor, and then gives you results as far as these experiments are done. So we'll go through a quick setup of a common bid experiment, but ultimately you'll be able to see these results and put those into rules if those hypotheses back out. So if we look at an experiment, it is based on specific sources with the idea that margin for affiliate 1 is not going to be the same as margin for affiliate 2 in most cases. So you can really filter on any of the options in the system: sub ID, pub ID, geos, time, days of week. And then here is where you are modifying either margin or price. In case of margin, you are changing the calculation for the bid that you're returning back to the vendor. In the case of lead price, you are actually modifying the bid that you are returning back to the vendor. So this lead price is typically reserved for lead buyers that are buying leads dynamically, or companies that are managing lead buyers to a cost per acquisition. So here then again, you can determine what you are modifying. Margins typically done in a percent. I want to take 30% more margin when leads come in on Sunday as this experiment is set up. You have your mins and your maxes, your floors and your ceilings, and then this allows you to set what percentage of the leads, of the pings that you want applied to this experiment. This is especially useful if you get a lot of pings or a lot of volume from one source or a few sources. This would allow you to run an experiment only on, say, 10 or 20% so that you do not affect your overall volume on a daily basis. And then you can set those number of pings. So again, based off of the volume of that source, if they ping in 1,000 a day, this experiment will run for a day. If you put this at 100,000, it's going to be 100 days, which is really not what these experiments are set up for. They're really more set up to short-term verify hypotheses and then put them into rules if they do back out. So if we look at not deleting one, and these experiments have the dashboard that's associated with them and the ability to set the rule. So when the experiment has the rule set, you can manage, drag and drop the order of rules, but essentially this removes the A/B testing so that every single time a lead comes in from that particular source, that rule is applied. If there are conflicting rules, it's the first one that is met. So bid experiments is an optional add-on. We have a self-serve option, which you can set up and manage your own. We also have a managed services option where our data science team will manage these experiments. They will build them, report results to you, and then work with you on creating new ones, typically running several all at the same time here. So the next thing I'd like to touch on is our demand-based AI model. So the data science team has a real-time machine learning model that will look to bid down the leads versus the lead price that you have calculated or stated, only when applicable. So essentially it is predicting pings, predicting the incoming pings matching to a given filter set using a time series model. And based on those predicted incoming pings and the daily limits, the system will look to bid down that lead when it's appropriate. So if we look into the lead system here, it is set up at the filter set level. So we have some clients that have this only on some filter sets. Some clients apply it system-wide. It is one of the margin options since it is a replacement of those fixed or variable margins that we've covered. So it's just kind of a set it and forget it. But again, that system that model looks to bid down the lead. So if we go to our leads tab here, you'll see the lead price and cost. And then you will see, if we go down a little bit longer here, you will see the model calculation. So essentially it is recalculating every 10 minutes your incoming pings per hour per day, and then looking against your hourly and daily limits to bid down that lead. If the calculated bid is higher than the price that you're independently calculating, the model does nothing. If it is lower, then that lower bid is used instead. So that is an optional add-on. We do charge on a % of savings if that's something you're interested in. We can certainly look to get that set up for you. So again, that's the demand side. So that is based off of filter sets. So that typically works best for clients that have daily and or hourly limits set. Those that have all no limits or are selling primarily to dynamic buyers, this is not a great option for you, at least currently. The excuse me. And so we'll be including these documentations as well, but here's some more information on how that model bids down leads more specifically. So the next AI model that is in development, we hope to have that out here in the next few months, is essentially the supply-based model. So this is the exact opposite of the model that sits at the filter set. And this is based on the incoming source. So essentially, the system is set up, or the model is working to predict the winning bid of a ping from that source, irrespective of your demand, how much you can sell that lead for, your margin calculations, anything like that. And then the variable there will be buy rates, so that there's some levers to be pulled to try and optimize the lead buying of each of those incoming sources. So again, that is in development and something that we hope to get out in the next few months. Next up, so many of you are familiar with our outside services. This is something that is in beta right now. And so if it is something you're interested in, please let me know. I can see if we can get your system approved. But this is very similar to the rule set of bid experiments that I covered. We have clients that don't want to go through the bid experiments. They know that, hey, if I pay 10% more from this source, or I pay 10% less, whatever that may be, then I'm going to win that lead. So that is where the bid modifier in the outside services comes into play. This is a boberdoo product. So outside services mostly are third party, with the exception of lead QC, and then now this bid modifier. Unlike most outside services, which are run on the post, this is run on the ping, since it is going to be doing the adjustments. If you look at the bid modifier, essentially this is doing the same thing. Oops. Allowing you, instead of running an experiment, to do that same thing of saying, hey, I want to take 30% more margin for a certain number of API calls per day based off of scenarios. So maybe only Colorado leads, or leads in a specific time or day. So again, that is built to specific sources so that you can apply those rules, and that just sits on top of your lead system. After that margin is calculated based on your best revenue scenario, in this case, it would take an additional 30%. All right. And so lastly, we covered a lot of things related to the data science team. That is something that our team works with clients on more custom projects, whether that is looking at your incoming pings to try and find any insights, duplicate pings, things of that nature, working to a cost per acquisition, or building models to try and optimize to a cost per acquisition. Some of those are examples of